What's up, guys? This is Crayfish Obsession here, and today we're going to be talking about why the red swamp crayfish is just so overpowered compared to its crayfish competitors. Now, before we get into its anatomy and why it's anatomically superior, let's talk about why they're invasive first. This is because these crayfish are from Louisiana in southeastern United States and a bit of northern Mexico, and the reason why these guys are just so invasive and everywhere is because for a good time in the 1960s, I think. Don't fact check me on that, but it's been a while. But a while ago, Louisiana had like 90% of all crayfish imports, and those are all red swamp crayfish. And they're also used as bait, and they're also sold in aquariums for their weird color morphs, because they can sometimes turn white and blue and yellow, pink. It's weird. But yeah, so that's how these guys kind of spread everywhere, just by like escaping crawfish boils, or maybe people kept some as pets and then released them. But yeah, so they're everywhere. They're basically everywhere. There's a ton of like acts to try to remove them, and like California spends so much money on trying to remove these guys because they have a really endangered Shasta crayfish that like lives in volcanic like rivers of old volcanoes. So yeah, so now that we've talked about how these guys became so invasive, let's talk about the crayfish itself. Now, the first thing you want to look at with the red swamp is its claws. Those claws are probably one of the most efficient claws, in my opinion, in the crayfish world, as these claws are light and they're hooked. And these do mean two things. That one, you get more pinching power out of the claws with less weight of the claws. So because the claws are hooked, they're much easier to penetrate any kind of armor, so other crayfish, and they also do a lot more damage because they're way easier to get into the skin of other animals, meaning that they can fight back a couple kinds of fish. And they can also fight back a lot of predators much better because their pinchers aren't exactly for crushing. They just go right through the skin or shell of any other crayfish or predatory fish that tries to eat it. Another thing is, because they don't really need as much power as a lot of the crayfish, because the claws can go in and they're just so efficient at doing it, the claws are lighter. They're smaller, they're more spindly, and this allows them to move faster. They have better mobility than a lot of the other crayfish, and as you can see, like, even the northern crayfish I have, when they walk around, they have to bear those giant claws, and they have to try to keep it up, and it really, like, makes them a lot more clumsier, while when the red swamp is walking around, its claws aren't as heavy compared to its body mass. Its claws aren't as heavy, and it's a lot lighter to walk around with, meaning that it does have a bit more mobility compared to the other crayfish, because these guys, their claws are just lighter and they have the same or more efficiency when it comes to defense and attack. So when it comes to fighting other crayfish, the red swamp is usually the winner because of its claw size. And it's not that its claws are small, they're very long, but they're just lighter to have to hold up, and this allows them to get to places where a lot of other crayfish would be really clumsy at doing. And their hooked claws allows them to go right through other crayfish shells. They're very good at taking apart the arms of the other crayfish, and their claws are a lot faster and easier to maneuver compared to the burrowing crayfish claws that are very wide and shovel-like. The next thing we want to look at is their carapace. Their carapace, in fact, is very tall compared to other crayfish. Now, if you look at a northern crayfish or a signal crayfish, those guys have very wide bodies. Their bodies are very wide, and they're fairly big. But in the Louisiana or red swamp crawfish, they stay skinny. Their shells will stay growing tall, and they will not grow as wide as some other crayfish, and this allows them to hide in places that other crayfish just can't really get to. This really allows them to like go into smaller rocks, hide in smaller places, and just really allows them to get into those places where a lot of the native crayfish can't get into because they grow wide, while as these guys stay thin and are able to hide in smaller places. And the next thing we're going to talk about is their reproduction. Now, a lot of people think that signal crayfish are super invasive in Europe because they can grow so fast. They can grow and reach sexual maturity in 2 to 3 years. These guys reach it in 1 year to a couple months. That's just how fast these guys grow. These guys are super quick at reproducing, very fast, and they can basically just outcompete a lot of the native species in terms of how many crayfish they can create. These guys are very good at reproducing and growing up very fast. They eat a lot, which means they can eat more than the other natives, and these guys are just able to reproduce faster than the other native species and power in numbers, right? And also some studies have also shown that similar to the marbled crayfish, the cloning variant, some people actually think that they might be able to reproduce pathogenically, meaning that they don't need another mate. So that's actually kind of creepy to think about. Another thing that's very important to the red swamp is how aggressive they are. These guys are super aggressive. They'll fight anything, and a lot of fish that try to eat them will end up with a fighting crawfish, and a lot of fish just aren't used to having to deal with crawfish that'll fight back. So these guys just aren't as easy to eat as some of the other more reclusive native crayfish that'll try to hide, and the fish can easily pick them off. Another important part of these crayfish is that they can burrow into the sides of lakes, so when drought comes and other stuff, they make a burrow down, and while the native species might be worrying about the water level, these guys will just burrow down into the ground and just stay there for as long as they need to. And that just really helps their chances of success and allows them to eventually procreate more of these red swamps and outcompete native species. And yeah, so those are the main reasons why the red swamp is just so overpowered in the crayfish world. If anyone asks about the rusty crayfish, I'd say they're also very similar to the red swamp. They reproduce fast, they eat a lot, but I think a fairly important difference is that the rusty crayfish is subjectively more aggressive than the red swamp. Its claws are also fairly good for going through things, but they are bigger claws, and the rusty is just very aggressive. I didn't think they'd make as interesting video as this one though, because I think the red swamp has more anatomy based features that makes them more viable for crayfish to crayfish kind of combat thing. But yeah, so it's been 9 minutes already, so I'm gonna end the video here. This is Crayfish Obsession, and I'll see you in the next one.